What Matters this week, again, we thank you for joining us. I'm Lauren Maloney. Scott Turnbull is here now from the Vermont Astronomical Society. You're also an engineer. You wear a lot of hats. Yeah. But I asked you in today because we really wanted to talk about the anniversary that everybody's kind of captivated with this week, which is Apollo 11.
Yeah.
You had told me in the email you were 8 when this happened.
Yep, I was a wee guy, right? 8 years old, not quite in 3rd grade, so it was summertime. And my parents indulged me, and we got to stay up and watch it late and watch the moonwalks, and it was on the black and white Zenith.
That's right. That's right.
Back in the day.
Was there, you could sense just, seeing so many programs and reading so much of the history that, up until, that afternoon, the anxiety, the pressure. Yeah. Was that, I know you were young, but was that felt among the adults in the room?
I don't think I had an appreciation for the risk. It was all very exciting. I was getting it was all in the news, right? There were toys for kids, space rockets and, spacemen. It was on the television. Star Trek was a thing, right? Star Trek had just finished broadcasting the original series, so kind of was hooked into that too. Mm-hmm. And then to see it happening in real, I mean, it wasn't just a TV show. It was, they were broadcasting all the various Gemini missions, and I was a little too young for the Mercury missions, which was very early 60s. Yeah. But certainly with Apollo, it was exciting.
The consequences, I mean, there had been so many lost astronauts, so many friends of Armstrong in the group at the time who had died trying to do something similar.
Yep.
Was that something that settled in maybe after the fact for you, just how weighty this was?
Yeah, I didn't really appreciate the Apollo 1 fire, which was a few years earlier. That was not. I think my parents sort of filtered that for me when I was at that point. I would have been 6, or whatever, 5, very young. Of course, in the news also was Vietnam was the other big news item. So I remember that. I remember the Vietnam news broadcasts, and this was a very nice thing. My parents were always much more willing to switch over and watch the space stuff, or have us watch the space stuff. So.
But this started a passion for you.
Oh yeah,
right?
Very much so. How does it work? Why does it work? Figure that out. What don't we know? How can we find out what we don't know? And so it was. I did start dabbling with chemistry sets and telescopes and some electrical motors and little toy robots and whatnot. I did end up taking an academic concentration, math and science through high school, and ended up going to engineering school, got my master's in engineering, got as close as interviewing with Jet Propulsion Labs to work there.
Wow.
I had a site visit with them. They flew me out, and I got to see some of their new stuff that they were working on in the very early 80s. We didn't quite come to an agreement on terms, so I ended up working for IBM instead. But I did. I have 30 years with IBM as an engineer, and now I'm working at UVM as an engineer. And I think I credit my folks with, sort of indulging me and telling me that this was an okay thing, because nobody in my family had ever done engineering or a science-based, degree. So I've taken it sort of on myself to spread it back, which is why you mentioned I have all these hats.
Yeah, and you had mentioned as well that you're a solar system ambassador for NASA, basically trying to pay it forward when it comes to learning and appreciating.
Yes, that's a volunteer program. There's about 1,000 ambassadors in the U.S. It's administered by NASA and Jet Propulsion Labs. It's just a volunteer effort where they provide all the materials, the handouts, the swag, as we say, the stickers, posters, workbooks, activity books. Some of it's geared for the young kids, some of it's geared for adults. We do outreach at libraries, schools, Cub Scouts, Boy Scouts, Girl Scouts, that sort of thing, yeah.
This picture we have in front of us, this is a copy, you told me. The real deal is at home, but yes. You got to meet Buzz Aldrin about 20 years ago.
I did. I had the opportunity, my alma mater, Rensselaer Polytechnic Institute, was having a space festival back in '99, and it was in the one of the new emails or the newsletters that came out, and I said, "Oh, that's something we could do." And my son was very interested in it as well at the time, and he was about 11. And so we pulled him out of school. We drove down the 3 hours to RPI, and there was a space festival set up in the field house. Other astronauts were there. They had hardware on display and people to talk to, but Buzz Aldrin was the big draw, and he was, as folks should be well aware, he was on the moon with Neil Armstrong for Apollo 11. He was second man down the ladder, got his boots dusty, and got to shake his hand, have a short conversation with him. He signed a book that he had written. He gave a lecture, a presentation afterwards about how we could get to Mars, and this was 20 years ago, so back then he was very proactive in trying to get this to happen. He's still very proactive. He's still very active in the public eye, trying to beat the drum.
That said, what do you think the future of space travel is? There's a SpaceX right now. What's to come?
I think, I believe in manned space flight. I think there's a lot of things to do. I also heavily endorse the space probes and the robots and such, because I think it's a good idea to go and poke around a little before you send people millions of miles away, if it's the case of Mars. It's time we went back to the moon. I think it's something we could do. It's a good training ground. It's close enough to home. We can get back again if we need to.
Well, this was a fascinating conversation, Scott. I appreciate you joining me.
I'm glad you invited me.
We'll be right back on What Matters This Week.